350 Days. It was a great documentary. I went and saw it when it first came out, and it instantly became my favorite wrestling documentary. You know, people don't realize you have a lot of background in film, starting with The Wrestler, and you were even doing documentaries before that, like Wrestling Then and Now. How did you get into documentary making?
What's interesting in life, one thing always leads into another. I was doing a newsletter back in the primitive pre-internet days, Wrestling Then and Now, which led to that documentary. And being involved in newsletters and documentaries led me to radio, which led me to being an agent with various wrestlers like Johnny Valiant and Nikolai and many other legends. And because of that, I was contacted by the Wrestler team, and ultimately I was hired because I had the contacts in wrestling with various promoters and legends and such. So what happened was the Wrestler came out in 2008, and years later, Darren Antola, not Darren Aronofsky, Darren Antola, the executive producer of 350 Days, pitched me this film. And at the beginning, I was very resistant because I just said to myself, you can't top the Wrestler. You know, nothing's going to top the Wrestler. But the guy was so passionate about it, and I could see it was from the heart. He's a blue-collar guy. He's not some, Hollywood bigwig. He loved 80s wrestling like we all did. You know, these guys were his heroes, and he wanted to document it and do it right. From there, once I agreed to being associate producer on 350 Days, we met with an editor whose name is Michael Burlingame, and this is interesting. He worked with Paul McCartney, Mariah Carey, John Cougar Mellencamp, Sting, not from WCW, from the Police, etc., so on, and he knew nothing about wrestling. And I said to Darren Antola, the executive producer, I said, this is the right guy. This guy, he doesn't know the main event guys from the mid-card guys, from the Carpenters, whatever the case may be. He had no idea. This guy, I said to him, I said, Mike, make a movie that would make an 80-year-old woman who never watched wrestling cry. I said, that's the movie we want. This is not a shoot interview. This isn't who was the booker in Chattanooga in 1972. There's enough shoot interviews in the world where you point a camera at a guy's head for 2 hours. I said, make a movie. Yeah, I said, make a movie that's going to move people, and that's exactly what he did.
And so you mentioned that you were contacted about 350 Days not long after The Wrestler came out. And
well, actually, it was several years after, and I had turned down other wrestling-related projects, including something on Chris Benoit. I said, I'm not going near that, okay? And I just didn't think doing another wrestling film would really add to my resume because, Mickey Rourke won Best Actor at the Golden Globes, and he was up for Best Actor at the Oscars, and, we were at the Lincoln Center, New York Film Festival, 2,300 seats sold out, and I said, you're just not going to top this. But when Darren came to me and just poured his guts out, Darren Antola, that we're going to do something special with this, he sold me, and I'm happy I did it when the smoke cleared because we're very proud of this film.
And you did put a lot of work into that, I'm sure, because most people don't realize that making a movie like 350 Days of The Wrestler is not a couple of week or a couple of month process. You guys took some time and put some serious work into both of those movies.
The Wrestler, from the time I met with Darren Aronofsky and the team to the time it was finished, was 7 years. There were 5 or 6 script rewrites. And what people don't understand about film is the business end of it is very complex. Every piece of footage, every photograph, every single thing has to be legal and legit. And, there's so many levels to making a movie. People have no idea. So The Wrestler was 7 years. 350 Days took 6 years. If you look at 350 Days closely, There's a dozen or so legends in there that are gone. They're gone now. That's how long it took to make this movie. Off the top of my head, Don Fargo, the Wolfman, Nikolai, George Steele, one after another. These guys are no longer, Larry Sharp, they're no longer with us. Superfly Snooker, of course. I mean, there's a dozen guys in there. We're just so happy that we captured them on film. Some of them, it was their very last appearance. Don Leo Jonathan, the Wolfman. You know, these guys weren't making tons of movies, you know, so we got them on film, and it's there forever, and they're pouring their hearts out.
And there are some really big names on that. Superstar Billy Graham, Bret Hart, Greg Valentine, people like that. So was that the majority of the time, was just going to them and collecting these interviews?
Well, some of these interviews were in Canada. Some of these interviews were down south. Some of these interviews were more local. You know, we came to these guys. They didn't come to us. It was a big undertaking, and every time you do it, you know, you had to set up a film crew and get on planes, trains, automobiles, and get out to them. And, you know, sometimes it was 1,000 miles away. Sometimes it was in your backyard. I mean, it was quite an undertaking. We had about 90 hours of footage when the smoke cleared, because you know, you're talking to a guy for an hour and a half, whatever. The editor, again, Michael Burlingame, whittled that down to an hour 50. And that's actually long for a documentary. People don't realize that either. So 90 hours became an hour 50. It's quite an undertaking, any film, especially if you're going to make the effort to make it special and do it right.
You said you spent an hour and a half, sometimes even more, with these guys. You know, one of my favorite scenes is watching Ox Baker sing and cook in his kitchen. You know, I'm sure you had some very fun interviews during that time. Do you have a personal favorite out of all of those characters you met?
People keep telling me that Ox Baker stole the movie. I mean, one person after another. They go, Ox Baker stole it. And the other side of it is, at some point, as producers, we kind of have to decide, how are we promoting this? And Bret Hart and Billy Graham, we basically labeled as the stars. Why? Because Billy Graham is so charismatic, he could read the phone book and it would be, you know, dynamic. And Bret Hart, it's almost like yin and yang. Bret Hart is very soft-spoken, introspective, and really opens up like he's on a psychiatrist's chair. I mean, the guy really opened up. So when we're promoting it, we're always like, Bret Hart stars in 350 Days, Superstar Graham stars in 350 Days. But all these guys were great. Tito and Greg and J.J. Dillon and Lanny Poffo. I don't want to bore your audience with a laundry list, but there's 36 or so legends in this film.
But there's nobody like Ox.
Yeah, Ox stole it. I mean, the guy, he's funny, you know, he's charismatic, larger than life.
He just takes over a room.
Exactly.
And he can't help himself.
Exactly.
He was at the Cauliflower Alley, and they were doing an auction. And, you know, can we get, whatever, $25 for this? And he said, come on, let's get this thing over with. $50, I'll take it, come on. Ox was just unbelievable. From, I got the old time wrestling blues. How about that? That was really a big hit for him. I loved it.
Ox was larger than life, and he was a movie star. He was in I Like to Hurt People, Escape from New York, other films. Johnny Valiant used to say to me, the wrestlers are much more charismatic than the movie stars. Johnny Valiant was an actor. He was on The Sopranos and various other projects. And he would say, you put a baseball cap on Al Pacino, he walks down the street, nobody notices him. Ox Baker walked down the street, everybody noticed him. You know? My father was a New York City taxi driver. He said to me back in the 60s and 70s, the only people that stopped traffic in New York were Muhammad Ali, Julie Newmar, who had like the greatest body ever, and superstar Billy Graham. He said superstar Billy Graham would stop traffic in New York.
Incredible. James, do we have anybody like that today that could stop traffic?
Absolutely not. I mean, Ox Baker is just an example of one of those characters that wrestling just doesn't have anymore. There's not many of those exuberant personalities. There's not many guys with bright red painted toenails that sing opera in the shower, you know, and that's one of the things that I think is important that you guys did really well, is capturing the voices of those guys that are no longer with us, the Don Leo Jonathans, the Ox Bakers, people like that. We need to preserve their stories or they'll just be lost forever, and I think that's the magic of 350 days. You hear the same stories you've heard before, and then you hear new stories that are forever preserved on film in 350 days.
And I also want to point out the director, Fulvio Cesare, he was not a wrestling guy either. And I think that was part of the magic of all of this, because when you go into a shoot interview or whatnot, you're kind of like looking for those details, discussing those angles, discussing the booker. We were not looking to do any of that with this project. We were looking to move people. And I think when the smoke cleared, the film accomplished it.
It really did. You capture the beauty of what they did, and at the same time captured the deep sadness and strain that it put on their lives. It was by far the most moving wrestling documentary. It wasn't just a day in the life. It was an overall look at what these guys went through, the good and the bad. It was a yin and yang type of documentary.
For those who don't know, 350 Days refers to guys like Ric Flair, Harley Race. When they were NWA champions, they were on the road 350 days. Bret Hart said he was on the road 336 days. Greg Valentine said to me he was on the road 320 days. So this isn't some, exaggeration. These guys were not home, and this film is about the toll that took on their marriages, their relationships with their kids, their bodies, their psyches. It's sex, drugs, rock and roll, but the toll that takes on you year after year after year. You guys know, you saw some of these guys early 80s and you saw some of these guys late 80s. They had slowed down. I mean, this was not an easy lifestyle.
It really isn't, and I think, sex, drugs, and rock and roll is one of the best comparisons you could make. Really, that's what this movie reminded me of. I've seen tons of great rock and roll documentaries, covering the Stones and Led Zeppelin or Woodstock and things like that. At the same time, they show that kind of dark side. It's not just glamorous, and we have a tendency with wrestling documentaries to go one way or the other. Show either just the dark side, like shows like Dark Side of the Ring, or just the glamorous highlights of it. And what really made 350 Days great was it encapsulated both. You didn't leave going, man, it was just such a tragic life, or wow, they were great. It gives you a full inside perspective of what it was like to be a wrestler in those heydays of the 70s and 80s.
And it shows you the guilt that some of them had. I cheated on my wife. I wasn't there for my kid's birthday, graduation. Think about Survivor Series and Starrcade. When was that? Thanksgiving and Christmas. These guys were away Thanksgiving and Christmas. Wendy Richter's in the movie. She said, I couldn't have a baby. Where was I supposed to put the baby? On the ring apron while I wrestled? They really, really sacrificed for their art, for their fans. There's a segment in the film where they break down their injuries, and Stan Hansen and Bret Hart, they're like pointing to various parts of their body, like everything's been broken, everything's been damaged. And wrestlers have told me I'm always in pain, always. They really sacrificed to entertain us, and you don't get a sense of that when you watch it on TV today. But when you see this film, these guys, wrestlers say, we have a bump card. There's only so many bumps on our bump card, and at some point the hip goes, or some other joint goes, or your back goes, and it's quite a sacrifice they made for us. I'm glad they were open with the 350 Days crew and really just poured their hearts out. I think you would really have to be cold-blooded not to be moved by some of the things they say in this film.
Oh, it's very endearing, very, very passionate. I love the film a great deal. I think that it's a story that needed to be told. I don't think your average person knows the life or the lives of what these guys went through. And you did a fantastic job, and not enough can be said about that, Evan.
Thank you so much. We're very proud of it. And let me just say one thing. This is an independent film. This is done on a shoestring. So, guys like yourselves who promote it and get behind it, we really appreciate it. This isn't WWE films. These are a couple of blue-collar guys who believed in something and put their heart, soul, money into it and, sacrificed to do this. We appreciate that it's gotten great reviews and we have worldwide distribution. Our distributor, Gravitas, has it pretty much everywhere, which is great. But it's still tough. They're There's a lot of wrestling content out there. So, when guys like yourselves get behind it, we're very grateful.
Well, everybody can see it on Amazon Prime, correct?
Yes, Amazon Prime. You could get the DVDs, the Blu-rays, any major cable system. You can rent it. It's on iTunes. It's everywhere. You could just punch in 350daysthemovie.com or come to our Facebook page and follow us. It's easy to find. Just punch in 350daysthemovie.com or go on Amazon, and it's there. Voodoo, it's pretty much everywhere. It's not on Netflix for whatever reason, but it's pretty much everywhere else.
I encourage everybody to check it out. James, it's one of your favorite films, isn't it?
I can't recommend it highly enough. I tell everybody that has even just a casual interest in pro wrestling, you have to see it. I used to say that about things like Beyond the Mat, but the moment I saw 350 Days, I knew this was the definitive pro wrestling documentary, and I cannot wreck it high.
Wow. Can we quote you on that? We
Please,
can put that in the
go
air.
ahead.
That's nice. Thank you.
Please, go
Thank
ahead.
you.
I would be honored. As I said, I cannot recommend it highly enough. I recommend it to everybody. It's so worth it. Whether you rent it, whether you buy it, I own it. It's something, it's like a pilgrimage. It's like Mecca. You need to watch it at least once in your life.
And many of the people that came to our movie theaters and screenings, a lot of them were not wrestling fans and appreciated it. A good documentary, I've seen documentaries on coal mining and, things I had no real interest in, but a good documentary will capture you. So for the wives and the girlfriends and people who aren't necessarily wrestling fans, I think they'd enjoy it also.
Well,